Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Mike. How are you today?
Hello.
Hi, Michael.
Michael.
Ooh.
Michael, yeah.
Oh.
Well,
Data Mike. I mean, I'm sorry. Data
you
Mike.
keep changing my nickname. It used to be Mike DiCarlo. Now it's just Mike Michael.
That one rings. Mike
Yeah.
DiCarlo.
I know.
Yeah.
Mike DiCarlo.
Just flows off the tongue there.
When we start our Italian translation of the podcast.
Yeah. Which would require I first learn Italian, so. I mean, I know a couple words like spaghetti. I've been in America too long. So jumping in today, a couple intros, a couple things across the internet. So first off, I'll point out the Microsoft Build Conference is coming up next week. Do you know exactly which days are the conference? I have it blocked off my calendar like Wednesday to Thursday.
Wednesday, Thursdays, 24th, 25th, I think.
24th, 25th. Those are the days of the conference?
I think so, unless it stretches to the 26th.
I couldn't remember if it was Tuesday through Wednesday. I'll have to Google it again. But the Microsoft Build Conference is coming up. If you haven't seen it, you've probably seen a number of very high level people in the Power BI organization touting it and pointing to it and saying there's some big things coming. So definitely worth your time. So next week, stay tuned. Jump into the Build Conference. Listen to, I think, the keynote. And there's a lot of comments from people on LinkedIn and or Twitter that are kind of highlighting some sessions you definitely will want to attend and see. So very excited for Build.
You are correct, Mike. It is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 23rd through the 25th in Seattle.
There we go.
Online is only 23rd, 24th.
There you go. The first 2 days. So Tuesday, Wednesday are the online events. I really wish I was trying to get to go. I was trying to help volunteer, but no one really needed my help. So they're like, we don't need you. You're just Power BI. Get out of here.
Power BI guy.
You're just a Power BI guy. Get out. That being said, some Power BI things. 2 blogs we actually want to talk about. And Seth, you found this one from Eric Syverson?
Eric Svensson, yes.
Svensson? Sorry,
yes.
I said it.
This is a fun one, and it's a super quick blog on his part. But it's always interesting to me that when clients come with an idea or your product teams or some UI UX element where they want to see something in a report, and in his case, he had a client that wanted to have a small color bar next to slicers that would kind of visually pop you over into a particular area. And as he walks through, he's like, well, the first solution is, just create a little box, right? That has the color. And now I have 2 objects on the page, but for every slicer, I now need to create this box and then alignment, all that kind of stuff. And what a fun little solution he found in there is using the shading or the shadow functionality for the slicer itself. So he describes how you set up the properties of that to kind of just have a bar of whatever color you would want on the left-hand side. You could do bottom, top, whatever. I just thought it's one of those like, now that I know that, that's super cool to know. I wouldn't have originally thought of it. So it's a fun little blog, good little tip and trick.
I liked it a lot. And I also thought as well, I mean, I think he's just using a shape next to the object.
Yeah, he was.
And I think you can control a shape color based on some data points, right? You can drive a shape based on some effects.
You want change colors.
Yeah, so I was thinking potentially, so look at this blog, I thought, wow, this is great. I love the idea that you could have a slicer that has a color next to it. And I also thought about, I dread this, but people do it. There are reports where there are numbers of filters on the same page, or a filter section of the report on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And I could definitely imagine like, okay, there are similar things that you're filtering. Like this is all customer level filters, but you may put the same color next to them. So these are all the same color filter. Or what I think you could also do is have the filter driven by a function that if it is in context of the filtering, or it has, it's somehow been changed or something,
light it up.
You could light it up. You could have it gray, and then when you change something, it actually lights up. It gives you a little bit of a visual indicator there.
So just looking at his layout and things, there is the function box next to the shadow. So you don't even need the extra.
Well, that's on the shadow. I'm not
right.
Yeah, that's on the shadow. But I think the background color of the square that he's using, I think you could do that too. So yeah, correct. You could change you could have
Right.
it all,
Ooh,
driven
now
by a
we're
function where it's
Technicolor
yeah,
changing reports. I want to see
yeah.
it. Yes. That's the
Well,
next thing.
It's incredible with all the conditional formatting areas. I don't think I've touched all of them because it's the ability to do the conditional formatting is on almost not every property, but basically anywhere there's a color. I've obviously touched a bunch, but there are so many situations or there's so many opportunities to do something. I need to spend more time on each and every one just to see what that can do. But it also goes too with if you have a client need where you're like, oh, I would never think of trying that out.
yes, exactly. And before, again, us oldies in this whole Power BI space, previously there was a function for formatting, but it was never highlighted until they kind of really made this new toolbar.
Right.
You had to put your cursor over where you were changing the color property
Oh,
to see if,
yeah.
remember that?
Yeah.
Remember when the effects button was hidden
Right,
until you put
right.
your cursor over it and then it would appear? And I'm like, that is like the worst designed everything I've ever seen. So I'm glad they fixed that part because that was like impossible to find. Meanwhile, if you thought about the filter pane or the formatting pane, you'd have to go through every property and kind of put your cursor over it. Like, does this format? Does this format? I don't know. It's like a hidden hide and seek around. will will it format?
And function format.
So that was kind of interesting. So I'm checking it out right now with the filtering on the visual. If I can actually change the color of the background. Yeah, it looks like you can change it looks like you can change the background color of a shape to have a function next to it. So yeah, you could do that. You could take the shape and make it formatting for this next to the slicer, which would be kind of cool. Neat idea.
He also did another. Speaking of colors, he also did another recent blog, right, on themes.
Yes, very true. So Eric, you're on fire. You're cranking them out here. So we have produced a new theme generator, or updated our current one to enable you to create themes and then visualize what the theme looks like on top of visuals. From my awareness right now, we're the only theme generator that allows you to do that. But sometimes you want to see the theme on top of your existing report. You don't necessarily want to see it on, just a generic visual, right? So our theme generator doesn't let you embed your own report and then apply the properties on top of that. So what you can do is you can actually take the theme file or the things that are extracted from the theme generator. You can copy and paste them, and Eric walks you through how to very quickly make a simple theme and then go into the playground. So Power BI's playground is for their developers, and you can render your own report from your tenant inside the Power BI playground. Awesome. And then in addition to that, when you render your own report, you have the ability of being able to apply via properties of the developer features. You can actually apply your own report theme. So you basically can copy the JSON directly into the web browser UI editor, and then you can immediately see changes to the theme file or what your report would look like after it has been styled with a theme. So Eric jumps in here. He shows you a demo of, here's how you would change this file. Here's how you would stylize the file using a theme file. And then you could real-time update that theme file as needed. So very good blog. I thought there was a very creative way of being able to have a live view of your report and your theme file all at once.
Man, I've been showing people the theme generator and just the ability to save and showing the visuals. It's basically blown the back of people's heads off.
It's such a cool little easy way to do it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, to save the tool too. Like you've
Yep.
seen my updates on GitHub. I've been sending quite a few feature updates just because I'm using it all the time. And
Yep.
I mean, but this is so important for what we do, and especially that before you had to be back-end JSON if you wanted to do this level of customization. Honestly, I would say the JSON or your theme creator should be required for Power BI developers.
To be honest, I find that, so I make tools for where I spend a lot of time, right? If I spend a lot of time, that was one of my problems. Themes came out, great. I like the idea of them, but I spent so much time trying to figure out what property was doing what, where this thing was going, how to stylize this thing. Like, and now there's thousands of properties because each visual has hundreds, if not tens of hundreds of visuals now. I mean, and there's just so much stuff you can do with all the theming at this point. It's almost overwhelming. So you almost need some kind of tool to help you navigate what the theme thing is doing. That's another challenge I think I've also faced with the theme portion is people have tried to keep up to date repos of all the properties and all the settings.
I know.
But desktop is now changing every month with new properties, new updates, new settings. And so to stay up and current with what current desktop is doing, it's almost impossible. You have to be updating your theme stuff every month. So now this tool is much more up to date. It probably has the most complete list of all the theme properties at this point. And I'm going to just double check. I think we're releasing some new features this week on there as well. If you go into the properties area on the theme generator, you now have a search window. So now you can search. So that just showed up this week. So now you can then go search for an individual property, and then it will highlight where those properties live inside the whole menu. Because that was, in some cases, if you're looking at a bar, I mean, it's a scrollable list of items, right? So it's very, very long. So if you want to search for something, it makes it much easier to find, a title or a header or the different objects that you're looking for in there as well. So that'll be very much more helpful. More features coming along the way as well. Stay tuned. We've got some other big updates planned. All right. With that, any other kind of openers that we have here before we get into today's topic? Looking for an answer here. Either one.
I think
anyone here.
No.
Bueller?
I just
Did you do it yet, Seth?
Did I do what yet?
It's Tuesday.
It's not
Tuesday.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? I'm on the wrong day.
Welcome to Thursday, Mike.
Wow.
What's our agenda today?
Wow. Man, it's been a busy week apparently for me.
Wow.
I thought it was Tuesday. I could have swore I was like waiting for Seth to say it this whole time. The first 12 minutes of this thing, I'm waiting for Seth to say it.
Maybe that is welcome to not Tuesday.
I would
welcome to not Tuesday.
Maybe that's my Thursday opener.
My goodness.
I would very much check your calendar today.
Yeah. I should make sure that I'm not going to miss meetings now because I'm sorely off date. Anyways, oh boy, goodness gracious.
But hey, I appreciate you teeing that up for.
Well, I was just making sure we didn't miss it, and just making sure we didn't miss it. All right, on to the main topic for today. Tommy, you kind of came up with this one, and this is something that you've been learning a little bit about, or trying to dive in a bit more. And I will say this is. Being in the data space, I feel like has been like a constant learning exercise. Always.
Oh my God.
Like everything I'm doing, everything we're working on, there's always something new coming out that I'm trying to figure out. How does this fit? What does this make sense? Should I invest my time on this new thing?
Yeah.
And so on the Microsoft blog, they put out a feature here is create Power BI reports now in Jupyter notebooks, which I find very interesting. So I'm going to put the post here, or the main topic today. So this is from the Microsoft blog, and then talking more about how do you embed things. So looking through the article here and kind of thinking through things. I mean, one is this concept of a notebook, right? So I've done a lot of work inside Databricks. That's where I love building things or data architectures at this point. And Jupyter notebooks are all a part of that system or that ecosystem. And I'll have to admit here, so one thing I just want to kind of discuss here is that there's a new way of kind of computing information. I think we've moved away a little bit from a single machine being able to compute your data, and now we're moving into this massive parallel processing ecosystem, right? So Databricks is the system that does a lot of this really cool notebook-based stuff. And so I came from SSMS, and then I see Jupyter notebooks. I really like developing in Jupyter notebooks a lot. And with this goes with this general programming language called Python. So initial thoughts. What do you guys think about the blog? What do you guys think about, this kind of concept of like notebooks and then, joining that with our data? Like, so notebooks traditionally came from like the data science realm. And now here we are joining the BI space into that notebook arena. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a bit of a history here too, because I think you're referring to a lot of that from the data engineering side.
Totally.
And if you really take I don't want to go the complete history, but
Yeah, let's go to the
when I was
complete history.
starting
Back when Python was
complete
made,
history of
back in,
Python, actually, their name actually because of Monty Python, which I still love to this
no
day.
way, it's really from
No,
Monty
you
Python.
didn't
I
know
did
that?
not know that.
Seriously, that's the origin of the name is because of Monty
I thought it
Python.
was because of a snake.
Well, you can take a look, but I'm pretty
I
sure.
gotta look this up right now because I might just drop
Look it up.
everything from now on just to learn this language. 'Cause that's awesome.
And this yeah. But when I started into the data analysis realm, I was like, okay, what do I need to learn? And it was either R or Python. But it's like, okay, this is much more data science. This is much more data engineering. I was doing more business analysis, and obviously Power BI came out. There wasn't too much synergy or overlap at the time. But if you keep looking at the story of the business analyst, business intelligence, there continues to be more overlap, or at least a little more relationship between what Python can do with all the packages and what you can do in Power BI, or what those skills are. Obviously, there's data engineering, which is probably pure Python, but I think there's more for even just the business intelligence analyst where, okay, maybe this makes a lot more sense. When I saw this article came out with the Jupyter notebooks, I'm like, okay, man. And to your point, Mike, I'm constantly looking like 5 years down the road, 2 years down the
Yep.
road. What do I need to know?
Yes. And to me, this feels like, to me, looking at Power BI inside a Jupyter notebook and the versatility that you can get around with notebooks, it feels like a skill that this could be something like general programming language, doing common data manipulations, whether you're a data scientist, a data engineer, or even now a BI developer, right?
Right.
It seems to me so universal across all those spaces. And frankly, Python's pretty easy to learn. I mean, I started learning Visual Basic. It's okay, but I was able to record. So I started with Excel. I started recording macros in Excel, seeing what it would auto generate. And I feel like most of what I've learned from languages, either SQL or how I started learning anyways, I've gotten, a little bit more sophisticated than recording something, right? Access databases is how I started learning how to write SQL. I would grab a couple of tables, I would pull a couple together, and I would then click the little code view. Oh, look at what it did. Oh, interesting. This is how it did a left join. Oh, here. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So I was actually using like the UI to help me generate a little bit of code that then I was able to dive in further and go deeper with that. I'd be curious, Seth, from your perspective. So the reason I'm bringing up this whole SSMS experience developer-wise and Jupyter notebooks development-wise, I feel like those are the two. SSMS felt old school to me, where I was writing, a SQL script and it's a single like text file almost, where I could highlight a portion of text and then run it. Whereas in notebooks or Jupyter notebooks, you have the ability of being able to run a cell of information. So it's almost like an evolution of like a sequence of thoughts, right? You can start thought 1, thought 2, thought 3. And I remember when I was writing some more SQL statements in SSMS, I would do that. I would build, a couple temporary tables at the beginning, maybe in the script. I would set my variables at the beginning of the script, and then I would work my way down the script to see what it was producing. And I would maybe do like a couple, like, I'd have to highlight the middle section and then run it to see what the output was. But it feels the same, but it better in a how my mind thinks and how I like to write and build and develop code.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the interfaces are more newer, right? So they're evolving with the code sets, especially as you can, with the Jupyter notebook, switch context of code, right?
That's true. That's very true.
Like the first, several cells, I can do some transformation, and then I can say, okay, now I want to like interact with that using SQL. So I think the capabilities are a lot better in the UIs and how we can write code to do what we want it to. So in context, like, what is your original question again? Like,
so my question, sorry. I guess my question was really more around like looking at how you develop in SSMS and now comparing that to how you develop in notebooks. My personal preference is whether I'm writing a SQL code block or just Python code blocks, I really like the idea of running like the cell-based notebooks that you can run with a Jupyter notebook, right? The cell-based one step at a time. So I prefer the now Jupyter experience over developing on SSMS for anything code-wise.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, there are components where, depending on how long the code gets within a particular cell, that I've like in SSMS, like just executing certain parts of code blocks is within that context is
Sure.
easy, right?
Yeah.
Because you just
Yeah, yeah.
highlight and execute that portion.
Sure.
Whereas Jupyter, I don't think Databricks does that well, or Jupyter Notebooks.
Yeah, it's like you get all the cell or none of the cell, basically.
Right.
But but then I guess kind of build more cells usually in general.
Yeah. I would say I'm biased, right? Because I've been using Jupyter Notebooks a lot more in the last 4 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? As opposed to just straight SMS. But across the board, I wouldn't say, like, I would say I would temper this conversation with like we are all playing in realms of big data, right? Where large volumes of information, these tool sets are incredible and allow us to do quite a bit. But I don't think that's the majority of companies yet, right? So like I think what'll be interesting is comparing and contrasting, like the need for learning Python, or all of this within Jupyter Notebooks, with the contrast of SQL still is the king of database systems, and like there are a lot more people writing SQL in servers and things that aren't touching the capacities that we need to, or the size, or whatever need to.
That's an interesting concept as well. There, I'll have to think about your comment there a bit more.
So I think let me rephrase. If our general hypothesis within this conversation is, hey, Python is a language that should be a stepping stone for a Power BI Pro, I guess I would say two things. What is your definition of a Power BI Pro? Because this definitely moves into BI developer realm for me.
Yeah,
right?
Okay.
Like you are hardcore in the enterprise tech space. This is not the business user. Is it? Is that agreed? Or Tommy, would you argue that?
And I think that's where the crux of my question is a lot of the conversation you guys are having, the dialogue, is for the data engineering, someone who already has that set up. I think I'm making the argument, or the origin of my question is for a Power BI developer, DAX, is now Python going to be part of that, or Jupyter Notebooks going to be part of that? Not so much like the business user, but I think for someone from my persona who's been focused solely on either SQL, but really focused on the front end more, it's seeming more and more that Python and Jupyter Notebooks are seeping into that requirement.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
But it depends. It depends on the ecosystem that you're playing in, right? Like how many companies and business folks? You're saying business folks.
Well,
I'm saying the Power BI developers, like Power BI pros.
Well, I want to add another flavor here to Tommy's comment, though. I would want to break your Power BI Pro into a report developer professional and a data modeler professional. Yes. And I would argue the data modeler and the data engineer, that role is getting very blurry to me at this point.
Binding.
Right? I mean, I feel like there's a lot. They may not be the same person, but in some organizations, they may be the same person. And so I feel like there's a very gray line between I'm a data engineer and I'm a Power BI data modeler, because a lot of the skills I think are mainly transferable across it. So I just want to bring up I'm trying to bring up the point of, I think in a Power BI Pro or Power BI professional, there's two roles. So I didn't mean to interrupt, Seth, I'm sorry. But like, I think if we talk about those two roles, I think it helps me understand, like, or where I would argue where you need to learn.
Sorry, what do you call it? One is Power BI Pro and the other is what?
So in a Power BI professional, there is a report builder and there's a data modeler. And I think if I distinguish between those two roles, it could be in the same person. But if when I'm talking about Power BI professional, I'm talking about, I think when we're talking about Python and we're talking about data engineering more exercises, I think we're talking more about that Power BI report or the Power BI data modeler.
Right. And I want to make the distinction that this person probably wasn't doing engineering or working in like Synapse before. They were purely
like, I guess think here's where I get stuck.
Okay.
Could a super user in a business unit be a Power BI Pro?
Yes, 100%. They could be modeling things, and they could be
and this is where that falls apart for me, right? Because a Power BI Pro can absolutely be a pro of connecting to multiple different data sources, using the tool to, and Power Query to transform model data, and build reports and be a pro at Power BI. Does that mean they have the skill sets around larger data sets or using Python or Jupyter? No, they're not going to touch that stuff, but they can be they can be a pro. Like they can know Power BI backwards and forwards. Like we're talking about data engineering aspects of big data, of where you're interacting with cloud services, right? Oh, pick your tool, right?
Yeah,
cloud services, Python in anything. But like you have to be in the cloud to do that.
Yes. Yes and no, right? So you can run Python locally, you can run notebooks locally, but that's not going to be something that's going to be part of your normal Power BI pipeline, right? That's so there is this level of notebooks today are in Synapse and above, right? So this is an exercise in data engineering that occurs just before you get to the data modeling space, right? So if you're doing that data engineering work outside of the Power BI ecosystem, right? So, if I'm interacting with Python or building Jupyter notebooks, whatever that is, you're either using Synapse or Databricks. That's your options. So in lieu of that, right? So I think Tommy's kind of pointing out here is this a skill that even if you're in the business unit thinking about these things, like, is this something on the horizon that you feel like that person should know? And I would kind of argue I think it's a bit more dependent on what you have access to in that business unit, right?
So let me ask a clarifying question, because I'm getting challenged by Greggy B in the chat, right? Why do Jupyter and Python immediately make y'all talk about big data? Okay, let's not talk about.
I would agree with that. I don't think it has to be a big data conversation.
Let's talk about cloud services, though, right? Isn't that part of it, or are there solutions that can be built in Python for ETL in frameworks on-prem? I don't know this question.
Well, I think part of my argument too is maybe
You're
not where we're at right now.
Oh, I'll answer it. Tony was going somewhere else. So,
well, no, okay, go ahead.
So I think the Jupyter notebook space turns a lot more towards a conversation around the type of compute engine that you're using to manipulate the data, right? So you're not using Jupyter notebooks on top of SQL, right? Because there's no really concept of like a Jupyter notebook, and there's some in but I think it's more of a Spark based thing, right? So it comes out of like the Hadoop area. It comes out of Spark.
But now if I'm talking Spark and Hadoop, am I not talking big data? Why would I invest in that if I don't have large data volumes?
I think Hadoop would start with more of that big data conversation. But I think now that we talk with Spark, I think Spark is less motivated by large amounts of data. I think you can run it efficiently, or even again, I think it goes to cost, right? At a certain point, you could just spin up a SQL server and throw some data at it, and then the cost to run that is minimal until you hit large volumes of data. As soon as you hit larger volumes of data, turning on a SQL server becomes more cost prohibitive if you're having terabytes or hundreds of terabytes of data in your ecosystem, right? So it would not be practical to put a petabyte of data in a SQL server. You probably could do it, but you probably wouldn't want to.
I feel like there's a bit that we need to take a step back with, because I think we're all talking about the here and now, or the last 2 years, what technology is available and what roles there are. If we continue to see how at least technology continues to evolve, and look at Power BI, even outside of Python, the tools available for us, the data modeling in the web, more things that are accessible. I would make the prediction that with what's going on with Jupyter notebooks, with what the role of the Power BI Pro is, go back 5 years, I didn't have to know half the stuff I know now. I have to know the data modeling web and the publishing and probably governance too. To me, the technology is only going to a place where that's going to be part of my requirement to at least be able to do not necessarily the whole full stack of Python or Jupyter notebooks. But I think if you were to look at a resume or a job description 3 years from now, and if you want to get into Power BI, I feel like Python's going to be on that job description.
That's a good question.
So, and I almost would make the argument more than SQL.
Well, so today you can already use Python inside Power BI by making like some data transformations inside inside Power Query. You can write your own block of code, or either I think you can do R or Python. You can add little Python or R scripts directly inside your M code, which I have found. So for me personally, right, writing Python scripts inside the editor of M one, we don't have great M IntelliSense anyways, and then to add Python to that, you're not even getting great Python IntelliSense inside
Sure.
the M
But
experience.
there's more tools accessible, VS Code, Jupyter Notebooks. I mean, oh my goodness, with Data Wrangler now, there's so
Okay.
many ways. There's so many things that are coming out like that. For me, for being a Python newbie, my growth path, because it's such a popular language, has been exponential since I've really like kind of understood this because of the IntelliSense and the ability in Copilot, where
Yes.
it's like, okay, I feel like I have no excuse not to know it and how it correlates.
Well, again, the conversation of is so let's take a little bit more of a step back, right? So I'm going to take a little bit of a higher view here, right? Okay, we're talking about Power BI Pro or Power BI Professionals right now at this point. But if I step back and look at other tools that Microsoft provides to us, like for example, Power Automate, you can do automation scripts on things. And there are some things that Power Automate can't do on a desktop, but you can solve with Python scripts that do very simple manipulations to images or other things there that you want to do. So like if you look at like where Microsoft is applying, where you can apply Python, right? They've given you Synapse, they're giving you notebooks. They've added like, so where do I see, like, this is where you have to say, I don't want to listen to what Microsoft says. I look at what they've been developing. Like, where are they putting their time and their effort, right? They've been incorporating more tools around that Power BI ecosystem. So, I mean, Synapse has it, Power BI has it, Power Automate has a little bit of Python in it. So I think in general, right, if I'm that business user and I want to learn something that's valuable, Python's very well documented. There's tons of examples. And frankly, if you go to Copilot and you need a little Python script, Copilot or Git or Bing Chat, whatever, if you just type your question there, how do I XYZ in Python? It's pretty dang good to write code for you to help you learn. And it even does a good job explaining it. It's like, this code's doing this, and in this line doing like, oh my gosh. Like, so for people to be able to start joining like that Python crew, I think the barriers to join is becoming less and less.
Right.
And where I see Microsoft going is they seem like they're putting it in more and more places to make it easier to use.
And and I completely agree. And not even from a data engineering point of view, Python's always been an incredible tool just for the data scientist or for business intelligence.
Yes.
But too often, because Power BI didn't play not well with it,
Yeah.
but there wasn't that overlap. And again, the accessibility, well, those barriers are coming down, or they seem to, at least.
And someone else is mentioning chat here, right? Not to mention also Azure Data Factory also lets you use Python as well. So I would say
directly or through Azure Functions.
I believe it's, I don't know. I have to look at that one. So I think you can use it.
I'm not aware of a direct way to do it in ADF, like outside of using Azure Functions. Which
maybe it has to be an Azure function based thing. But regardless, though, I feel like this is a skill that, one, it's valuable to learn. It's being incorporated into many different parts of the tools around data and data intelligence. And I think a natural progression would be, okay, I'm in the business, I'm learning I'm learning visualization building. That makes sense to me. I think if you are dabbling in Power Automate, and again, this is another place where I think there's potentially, Synapse is like the first product that I really feel like there should be some IT developers in there, and there may also be some business users in there, right? So we've always had this conversation on the podcast around, hey, I just need access to data. I want to write a script against something and produce a table, whatever that may be. And I feel like Synapse is one of these first tools where I can give regulated access to a team of people. So, inside Azure. So this is the Synapse environment is really like the, all right, I'm going to draw a line here because I think, Seth, you're giving me some frowns here. So maybe you're just thinking about it. But as I think about what is the business user's realm of tooling and what is the IT realm of tooling, I think I draw the line around Azure. There's not as many business units, I think, dabbling in Azure. Now, granted, there are some that are doing it. There's some that are not. But I think the majority of the IT organization is focusing themselves inside Azure, and that's what they're comfortable with. Spinning up servers, working on cloud infrastructure. The business isn't as comfortable. And when I was in the business, we were like deathly scared of Azure because it was like, we don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know like all these things. We don't know what we're doing. But in reality, you could spin up a SQL server, let it run for a month, and have minimal cost to it. So you're not really absorbing too much cost around that. So from that perspective, when you start going down that path, you're like, okay, it's not as scary as I thought it was. Once you start getting into it, then you start having this conversation of, okay, maybe Synapse is that tool that starts bridging, taking those business users, giving them a bit more capability with SQL tables, database structures that are in a SQL serverless environment that does start exposing notebooks to you. And so I think, allowing the business to start playing in that, again, I would still feel like I argue Synapse still feels like a Power BI like tool, right? It's not like I'm connecting to a server via SSMS. Most of the activities you need to produce inside Synapse are in the browser. So I just feel like that seems to me the way Microsoft's going. They're not developing a ton more with SSMS at this point. They're not developing a ton more with store procedures, right? They're using other mechanisms to trigger and execute on top of data flows. And I think the main reason why Microsoft keeps store procedures around is because there's been store procedures for eons, and they have to keep them around for support for legacy. But I don't see them building like, wow, we built 10 new connectors inside, or 10 new, data engineering tools inside store procedures anymore, or something along those lines. I feel like that is not as much of a development cycle as what we're seeing now.
I mean, a store procedure is nothing. I don't quite understand that comment, because a store procedure is nothing other than saying, like, I developed a Jupyter notebook to do a thing. Like, I can do anything with the store procedure. I can have it return data. I can do a bunch of ETL within it. I can transform things. I can modify, delete, update. I can do, like, that's the mechanism by which I execute a manipulation or an extraction of data within a SQL server.
But in all these tools,
saying like, oh, they're not developing, like, it's the framework. Are they increasing the capabilities within those tools to, like, read out of JSON, of executing Python, or like doing cross-functional things across, like, with other tooling? Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's the play, and it has been for a long time, because extending that tool from what it has served for a very long time.
Yeah.
Right. I guess where I'm still hung up in this conversation is,
I see that
we haven't clearly articulated, at least in my mind, we're talking about a wide swath of it. When we say Power BI, there is a wide swath of users. And if we've talked about multiple different times in this show, in a priority matrix of things you should learn when your job is developing reporting within an organization, stacking Python against DAX, visualization, certain things, is where, like, people not accustomed to listening to the show are going to be like, oh, I'm this business user, I should go learn Python. And I don't agree with that. I don't think, to me, this is part of one of those front and forward things that, like, falls into the, or learning Power BI, Python should be like the next thing you learn. And it's important for me that we articulate, like, where that line is, because I don't, like, this is a data engineering part of a connection, right? Connections, connecting to data, a transformation language, right? Like, that's a component of certain ways in which organizations have manipulated and done ETL, which is a developer focused task typically.
Correct. Yes.
So when we say Power BI Pro, like, the delineation is, we're talking about development, a developer level task. So if that's your interest area as a front end business user who is learning Power BI, that you want to move towards a developer role, would this be applicable as far as a language to learn if you didn't know any? Yes. Would you prioritize that over SQL?
So this is a good question.
And this is where, like,
I don't know if I would prioritize it over SQL, but I definitely think it's high. It's high mark. Like, so I would for sure say SQL is probably your number one language. If you're doing things in data, SQL, it's everywhere. And it's
right,
and
because that allows you, from the business pro, from the Power BI Pro perspective, that allows you to connect to many more sources of information, or, like, be it a SQL server, be it Oracle, be it MySQL, be it, like, even Databricks, right? That language traverses all of these different tool sets that I would be interacting with in many different ways.
I would change your phrasing just slightly, and then I would agree with you. You said learning SQL gives you access to many more sources. I'm not necessarily agree with that statement. I would agree with using SQL gives you many more options to use a different compute, right? So I think the main difference for me here is, am I using a SQL server for computing, which runs SQL verbatim, or am I using some other compute engine? And it seems like the two that are the ones that are most interesting to me right now are, Spark and SQL servers. Those are the two kind of main engines that I interact with. There's not many other engines that I, from a computing standpoint, that I integrate with that are as popular as they are.
Sure.
I think from my point, it's important to distinguish. When I first started going into the BI space, it had nothing to do with data engineering. And it was kind of very
That's a
wrapped,
good
at
point.
least 7 years ago, it was wrapped with data science. And it was anything, if you looked up business intelligence, it was data science.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you need to learn? It's
Here's the
Python.
leap.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
honestly, the data engineering side of Python is relatively new to me. It came after the fact that if you want to be in the data space, you need to know Python to do analysis and to do deep analysis. Had nothing to do with engineering.
Right.
So there's a whole other realm of Python too that's outside of Spark
Yes, correct.
and outside
Yes.
of Databricks, where you may not even have to go into that space at all.
Yep, that's very true.
And I think for me, that's what I'm arguing. Yeah, Seth, your original point, if I'm the BI pro or developer, do I need to have to now go to the engineering side? Probably not. I mean, unless you want to become an engineer. But for that, and for the BI pro or the person who's doing the analysis, where there's, I think, at least more of the blend with the data science too. And again, it's only because technology is becoming more accessible, and I can learn it much more quickly with Copilot and VS Code.
So what I would say is, we're talking about Power BI developers.
I mean,
sure,
because in my world, a Power BI developer can do the whole spectrum. Enterprise.
Okay. And
enterprise.
okay.
You do ETL work. You can do transformations in whatever system you're working on. Like you manipulate data before you actually get to a modeling layer, wherever you do that, and you have those skills and capabilities to do that across the board.
Right.
In organizations that are large enough, do you have separate teams for this? Absolutely. Data engineers, data
Correct.
modelers, visualization.
Yep.
But in many places,
You
that's
don't have
one
that yet.
person, or those people can traverse that ecosystem very, very well.
Right.
And if you're only a SQL person, right, would I say Python is one of those languages that you should add to your lexicon? 100%. Right? Because even in areas where
I agree.
Scala, which is a very smaller subset language, much more like on a direct function language part, though, have like the experts that I've known, every one of them is, if you know Python, you can pick up Scala.
Correct.
If you know, and what this does is provides a different framework of how you interact with ETL, different library, like a whole host of features and functionality that just aren't there from a query language perspective, that I think make it extremely valuable. Plus, it's one of the most popular programming languages out there.
And it's growing in popularity.
I'm not poo-pooing Python, right? I'm not saying that it's not important. I'm making a distinction of where it's important.
Sure. And I think for me, I would get frustrated if I'm a Power BI pro and now you got to know Jupyter Notebooks to do more analysis. It's like, I already have to be an expert in DAX and Power Query and data modeling and SQL. And it's now Python going to be part of that stack. I don't know, but to me, it seems like it would make sense, but it's frustrating.
And there is a distinction I want to make that based on a conversation that's happening in the chat. When I say learn SQL, I am not saying learn the SQL engine. There is a huge distinction between
DBA and learn SQL.
DBA, or understanding the ecosystem of the entirety of SQL servers. And no, I'm not saying that. Like, from a BI professional, you need to learn how to query effectively and efficiently. And above and beyond that, don't waste your time. You maybe some performance tuning stuff, but long gone are the days where I'm going to say you need to learn the architecture of how SQL servers work and views and indexes and how we create things. And, in general, fine, but you could waste an entire a lot of time in delving deep. What I'm talking about is this SQL querying is your sweet spot. If you know how to manipulate a query and generate your output in an efficient way, you're done. Move on to the next language that's going to help you like level up your skills and make you much more comfortable. And I think this was the point that was being made by, Mike and Utami, was much more comfortable in these new ecosystems if you get the opportunity to interact with them, which is cloud-based services, especially in the Microsoft stack. Right?
Correct.
Because 100%, a ton of this stuff is you can traverse a lot of this ecosystem with Python.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easier. And I think all the books on data or data storytelling, data analysis starts with that data exploration side. And Power BI is maybe not the best tool for the exploration, seeing the outliers, seeing
I'd agree with that.
like the different areas there. It's harder.
You kind of got to have to do some work to get to a point where you're like, okay, I can actually get to a place where I understand what's occurring in the data. But data profiling tools have been a little bit more common inside the Python space.
Easier.
Yes,
exactly.
I'd agree with that.
And I think that's part of what I'm saying too. But yeah,
I mean, even when you look at the blog article, so I'm going kind of bringing it back here, right? So we've been talking about like Python, a skill set, right? Jumping into a Jupyter notebook and then being able to quickly say, okay, from this data frame, build me an auto-generated report. I mean, that's kind of what they're trying to make you do. They're trying to say, here's some data profiling on this data frame or whatever you've produced inside a report, and you can continue to manipulate and pick different data points and then add them to the visuals on the report canvas there for Power BI. But in my mind, I'm looking at this going like, they're taking the visualization side of Power BI and applying it to data categorization, some data investigation. They're trying to make it a bit more automated because in order for me to build 4 or 5, and again, the example they showed, there's like 6 visuals on a page. It takes a bit of time to figure out which dimensions, which measures, which numbers are the right ones to fit together to show you actually some information about what's occurring in your data set. So go ahead. You were saying something, Tony?
No, I was going to say, I would agree completely because part of any data analysis is what do we need to filter out? What do we need to group by? What are the outliers, right? And like, I think that's always been more difficult in just Power BI visualizations. Like, yeah, there's some, like I would always use like the box plot and the histogram to try to do that, but it's still a harder thing where literally like Python packages have been made for that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And another kind of consideration here is, I think what we're also seeing here is we're seeing a divergence. So to your point, Seth, earlier around what size organization are you in and what level do you have access to be able to do the data engineering, right? If you're in a bigger organization and there is a department, a team that is already owning and managing the data, you probably are not going to need as much skill around the Python space because there's just not as much opportunity to get into, to your point, the cloud services like a Synapse, a Databricks, right? Where you're going to be able to leverage that and make data engineering pipelines on top of that with Python. The flip side of this is, and I think this is where I feel like a larger majority, maybe, I don't know, there's like the medium to small side of the business, or there's the departmental space of this, where we don't have support from a broader IT organization. And there is call it the Power BI data modeler, and they're not just level 100 anymore, they're level 300, 400, right? They're very comfortable writing them. They're very comfortable doing a lot of things in there. And maybe they've gotten to a point where that individual will eventually or will work on adding other tooling like Azure Data Factory or Synapse. They're going to start venturing into a more data engineering like role, right? So that data modeler expands their area of influence and they're going a bit deeper and they're saying, okay, the Power BI data models and the Power Query I have today is not performant enough. Everything I hear says I should start doing those transformations upstream. I'm trying to use Roach's maxim, right? Transform as far upstream and downstream as necessary. So I think there becomes a point when you're at that model builder level where you need to get more control around what those data queries are. And where I have found that's been very true in my career, I started very much in very heavy Power Query, lots of lines, lots of transformations. And as I get into organizations where I am the sole data engineer, data modeler, and report builder, and helping them get their feet, on the ground around Power BI, I have more control of things further upstream. And so I'm helping them turn on a Synapse. I'm helping them build stuff upstream that now my Power Query becomes incredibly simple. So my Power queries look like 3 or 4 steps now, and all of that data engineering work is being done upstream in an engine that actually works a bit more efficiently for, recursive transforms, right? Something I have to look up or weird joins or whatever that stuff is. I can then be a bit more focused on that upstream data transformation and preparing more data before I get to Power BI. And again, to your point, Seth, right? Purely a data engineering role. It's definitely more in that space. But what I see is, again, the trend I feel like is that data engineering role is coming closer and closer and closer to that data modeler. And we may not be there today. They may be today very distinct or two separate roles, but I could very much see in the next year or two that role becomes even closer together. And we're going to even see more connection between that data engineer role and the data modeler role. They're almost going to be synonymous.
Right. And I will make this point too, right? From a trend, from someone who reads a lot of resumes and works in a cloud environment. I would say if you are a full stack developer of on-prem where SQL was the thing, Python is absolutely something that you should add to your resume or your repertoire,
really good point.
because that puts you like, what I'm trying to say is many resumes of folks that have been in this world for a very long time think that the 3 pages of how they managed hardware and infrastructure of SQL is impressive, and it's not, because I don't care about it anymore. We don't have to support that in the cloud.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So what are the languages that let you navigate and modify and manipulate data? And I think this is, to me, the most interesting aspect of how things are evolving in this ecosystem. It's how efficient you can be with manipulating data, not without I'm not going to say without constraints of like understanding cluster usage and what you're actually doing in ecosystems, because there's a cost. However, like less time needs to be spent on maintenance of things or setting up the structures yourself.
That's a really
because
good
these
point.
frameworks are much more automated in a fashion of just handling that for you. So if there is a level up for data engineers of not legacy platforms, but platforms that are typically just more SQL based, Python would absolutely be one of those things that sets you apart.
And the last thing I'll say too is, even from my point of view, is just going with the pro or the data analysis business intelligence, the barrier to learn is so low with the tools available. I mean, oh my gosh,
That's very true.
Any AI extension
Yeah.
or any visual code extension that has to do with AI for Copilot, what does it always say first? Works with Python. Python is such a popular language. GitHub's Copilot, ChatGPT, the ability to translate. I can translate SQL to Python in Copilot.
Yeah.
And for me, like, it's been this exponential learning curve compared to learning other languages because it's so popular, and because it already integrates with so many other things that I do. So like, I don't want to say it's almost doesn't make sense not to, but if it is going to be at least somewhat of what I do, maybe not all of what I do, even from the discovery and exploration and data science, it's very hard to make the argument not to at least know the basics.
I'm floored right now that this conversation went so fast, in my opinion. I feel like I'm like 30 minutes in. I'm looking at the clock going, oh my gosh, we're almost at the end here. So I guess I'll probably have to give us a final thought here, and we'll hop on over to ChatGPT and see if ChatGPT would recommend Python by itself. So Seth, I think what you said was incredibly profound. And for people who didn't hear what Seth said, I'm gonna have to reiterate. I'm gonna say it in a way that makes sense to me, just because I'm understanding what you said. As a hiring manager, someone who's looking for skills to bring on board, if you're looking for people to help you build cloud-based services, the experience you had around managing servers and on-prem things is becoming less important in your eyes in order to be able to manage these new cloud-based services. And I think there is definitely a trend in the market, I don't care who you are, businesses are trying to get out of the business of managing internal infrastructure on things, period. The cloud provides you more innovation. You have more opportunities to optimize and tweak your pipelines and
Speed
flows.
to market.
Yep. And so there's a very competitive move here to move organizations off of on-prem and into cloud. And also, I think what you're also going to find here too, the services that companies are purchasing. Companies don't want to purchase a full SAP server on-prem anymore. They want to go buy the SAP server as a service. And then what is happening is the organizations themselves, the operational systems that run their day-to-day business are all moving to the cloud anyways. There's higher availability. It's less upfront costs. It's more amortized on the monthly basis. And it's more of a pay to play kind of method, right? If I use it more, I pay more, right? If I sell more things, I pay more, which makes sense. That scales with how well you sell stuff. And so to your point here, Seth, like I think the trend here is, again, taking a really high step back, we're going to cloud. In that cloud space, if you are playing in that arena, having something on your resume that talks specifically around notebooks, Jupyter, Python, and how that integrates with your business intelligence stack, I think is very relevant from that standpoint. And I would also echo the same thing, right? And again, you're hiring for people that are both front end and back end to some degree, right? You're saying like I use Databricks and I use Power BI, right? That is now the stack by which you operate in. And yes, there's a whole bunch of that's data engineering, but you're looking for people who can span. I want that person that can span the data engineering space and can span the modeling area. That's the kind of skill set I think we're going to be looking for.
Yeah, ideally, right? But
Yeah.
even in the climate that we are, where the vast majority of people don't have those skill sets,
Mhm.
that's where it's really important to be very, very good at the transferable skill set,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So either you come
Agreed.
in as an amazing DAX modeler or Power BI visualization expert or
Mhm.
the things that are so comfortable to you because you have to learn all these things you don't know. So
Yes.
I need to utilize you in the areas that you do know really well, right?
Yes.
So whether it's Azure Data Factory, Synapse, even SaaS versions of SQL, right?
Mhm.
Like all of that plays completely differently than on-prem solutions.
That's good. That's good. Anyways, so that was the thing that really stood out to me. It's the cloud that is changing what we need to know and learn. All right. So quickly over to ChatGPT as we wrap up here today. So the question to ChatGPT today is: should I learn Python for Power BI development? That's the question I asked. So the question actually gives me like 5 good bullet points here. Learning Python can be beneficial for Power BI development. Python is a versatile programming language that's widely used in data analytics, data manipulation, and data visualization tasks. And then it kind of lists out a couple key areas of where Python does well, right? It does well in data manipulation. It does well in advanced analytics. For example, machine learning. You can use things like TensorFlow, Keras, PyTorch, like all these, to our point, it's a gateway to where you're going to do machine learning. It allows you to build custom visualizations. There's libraries that you can use that are built in, like Matplotlib or Seaborn. These are extensive data frameworks that let you visualize things in Python. Now, I would also echo, you could use those libraries inside Power BI by making a Python-based visual. So you could leverage them. There's definitely some limitations there, but you could use those libraries as well inside desktop. There's automation and integration. Python can help you automate things. And then lastly, this is what the point you were making, Tommy, was community support. Python has a large and very active community with abundant resources, tutorials, and forums available. So odds are you're going to find some answers. I really like that answer because I think that's one of the strengths of that language is it's been around for so long. It has so much general help. It really makes easy. So it gave me a little in conclusion. In conclusion, while it's not necessary to learn Python for Power BI development, it can enhance your capabilities and offer more flexibility in data manipulation, advanced analytics, custom visuals, and automation. Consider your specific requirements and goals to determine whether investing your time in Python would be beneficial for your Power BI projects. It didn't talk anything about cloud
or
engineering, but I think a lot of the main points here, it talked to the strength of Python, and I think that's a very good starting point. But it was okay. So I would I guess we got to score it again at this point. So what's your score, Tommy? How did ChatGPT do?
I think that's a solid 7 out of 7 for me.
Oh, all right. Seth, how about you?
That all boxes.
I don't give 10s.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
that's perfection. That's perfection.
It's like a 8.9 out of 10.
All right.
Solid.
I'll give it a I wouldn't probably give it a full 7, but I would probably give it a 6 out of 7.
Okay.
I'll give it a 6 out. I'll stick with Tommy's scale, the odd number there. I won't go to 1,000 like I usually do.
You're 76, 5, yeah.
761 out of 1,000. That's
6,000 out of a 6,100.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. We appreciate your listenership. Thank you, everyone who was in the chat window. Amazing conversation that was going on. So thank you so much for chat. It was super fun listening to everyone talk and discuss things. Everyone was listening to Greg as he wields his data stack knowledge, which is awesome. I love. I mean, it's literally like we have like a Wikipedia of data knowledge. That is Greg. So Greg, thank you very much for participating and adding tons of really great feedback inside the comments. That is super fun. I really love enjoying and listening to those. Our only ask with the podcast is if you like this content, if you like what you're hearing here, please share it with somebody else on social media, on someone at work. Just let them know you found an interesting podcast that's helping you think through or have those water cooler conversations around Power BI and data things. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere they're available: Apple and Spotify, Google Podcasts. Make sure to subscribe on those audio platforms. You join the conversation live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central on all Power BI Tips social media channels.
Excellent. And remember, as this kind of episode summarizes the Roach's maximum, which is transform your data as far upstream as you can and as far downstream as necessary. I feel like there should be another ending phrase, but that's all I got right now. That's what we're going to get today. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.